right, hello everybody, and welcome back to the T.H.O. Movie Reviews Podcast, the show where we bring you passionate, honest, and insightful film criticism. You're listening to part one of our two-part podcast about the most essential films of the 2010s, and I am joined by two of my wonderful colleagues over the phone to shake things up, or aka because we're all semi-quarantined because of the coronavirus. First up, we have Maxwell Meyers. Max, how you doing?
Good. I'm here in California, remotely, because this is where I live now.
That's the funny thing, because it's like that's the one thing that's not like an effect of the virus, because we would be doing this remotely with you in any case, since you're in another state. I mean,
Yeah, but it's still exciting. We're getting it up and running, and yeah, it's fun. I'm excited to talk to you guys. I've been self-isolating since I moved here in my own way, because I'm somewhere where I don't know anybody, and I haven't had a job, so not much has changed, actually. Most of the world around me. Everybody else is just not doing
it. All right, well, also here we have Mo Shaunette. Mo, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm podcasting from my bed, which is a first.
You know, it's funny because I'm next to my bed. I'm not on the bed, but I am next to it because my desk is next to my bed, which is, I gotta tell you, like, that's one of the things that's one of my biggest distractions. Like, when you can lie down, like, you know, in the midst of typing up something, it's like, that's a whole nother thing, but, you know.
Miracle of modern technology.
Indeed. It unites us even in these dark times. So, as I mentioned, we're talking about the most essential films of the 2010s today, and what do I mean by essential? Any film that was culturally, commercially, artistically impactful over the course of the decade, and we had a funny, we were texting, all of us, just the other day, and we had a very, like, funny back and forth about what exactly does essential mean, which I feel that, I feel like the main thing is that we talk about, an interesting variety of films, which, judging by the Google Doc I sent you guys, I think we've got a pretty interesting crop.
Hopefully you weren't waiting on me to finish filling out my form.
Well, yeah, because, like, so I was in suspense, because I was like, okay, Max is doing Get Out, but what's going to be in those 4 mystery slots? Is he going to 3 other mystery slots? Is he going to make us wait? No, but it was good. It's so without further ado, Max, do you want to tell us about your first pick?
I mean, yeah, you spoiled it then, but let's talk about Get Out. I was late to the Google Doc list, so when I came back, I got a chance to peek at all of Ben and Mo's picks. So when I didn't see Get Out was on anyone's list, I felt like, well, we got to talk about Get Out. I think it definitely will long-term be an essential viewing for cinema forever. I think there are some choices I think you can pick, and you're like, oh, this is big right now, and it's going to be big forever, and then 3 years you kind of forgot that it ever even happened, and Get Out has not been that. In fact, they're doing, like, college courses on just that movie alone, and what's going on inside it, and I think it's definitely an essential watching for the 2010s. We don't know how much other things that will be able to be said about that, but I definitely think that was it. What was also on my list was Cabin in the Woods. I did not end up going with that one. I did Get Out over it because although both kind of upend the idea of a horror movie and the genre, Get Out does so much more. I think I was telling Eddie, I was like, it's like sinking a boat. I feel like, the traditional way is you get one big hole in the boat. I was told that, it's like sinking a boat. I was like, the traditional way is just to blow a big hole in the boat, let it sink. I felt like Cabin in the Woods cracked a boat in half and let it sink that way. And then Get Out was like holes drilled everywhere in the boat, slowly sinking, and you're just panicking. I this is my third time watching it. I haven't watched it in a while, so I was watching it at home, and I did not blink any more than I did the first two times I watched it. It's still terrifying. It's creepy as hell, but I think more importantly, it talks about race, which I think is going to be a very big theme when we look back in this decade about people, whether it's race or gender or minorities. I think there's going to be a big talking piece about this decade and how the view and the protagonists in our movies changed. And Get Out is definitely one of those movies.
Well, continuing in that vein, I mean, I know we're all big fans of Get Out here, and the thing that I think is interesting is that the movie was written while Obama was president, and from my understanding was kind of meant as sort of initially as kind of a question, like, oh, you think things are so much better, and yet it was released during Trump's first term, and kind of I don't want to say took on a new meaning, but it was I mean the context changed. And I mean, I'm just like, I'm curious about what both of you guys, think about, the movie, what the movie meant, like, beyond being a great, really entertaining horror film at the time it came out, and today as well.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. It definitely felt like, striking when the iron was hot in that case. I hope they didn't intend it that way, but that's kind of how it came out. I've talked a lot about how racism in movies is depicted, and it's usually in the broadest strokes possible. It's some angry, surly redneck who's saying the N-word a lot and stuff like that, and that's definitely true in the world. It's becoming more true, which is horrifying. But there's different levels of it, and some racism can be more nuanced and more insidious than that. And Get Out was very instrumental in that it was able to bring that across through the visual language of cinema, through these science fiction tropes, through stuff like this idea of lionizing black culture while not being able to respect or understand or empathize with black bodies. And that, in terms of living through, the Trump administration and the election, when a politician whose platform, the baseline of it was racism, where his first words out of the gates were Mexicans are sending us drug dealers and rapists, and people vote for that, it becomes, it's scary to know who you can or cannot trust, who you can or cannot believe when if they can overlook that. So I have a lot of affection for Get Out too. That was my favorite movie in 2017. That's still just a fantastic feature on its own. But the fact that the way it talks about these ideas and these issues, that we are not by any stretch living in a post-racial America, is really it's very prescient, and it's very of its time, but very necessary, I think.
I think too.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Actually, I will say this was the first time I got to see the alternate ending. I don't know why I never watched it at home. I think I was just very satisfied with the original ending. But the alternate ending, you're right, that it was actually written during the Obama years, and the original ending he wrote and the shot was that instead of the police car showing up with his friend, it's an actual police officer, and they tackle him, and then they put him in jail. And he ultimately, and his friend does come to visit him, and he's like, don't bother trying to get me out of jail. Like, there's no way to explain this. I'm just gonna be here. He goes, but I fought my demons. He gets over the fighting the demon that is, his abandoned mother during a hit and run. Except, he makes history right by, saving what he thought was, the housekeeper, who was actually the grandma, trapped in the body of a black woman. And he actually said that I think Kaguya signed on because he told me because of the ending, and then he got it. And then and it was kind of a point to make was that, racism still exists. It's just bubbling under the surface. And he did write that during the Obama years, but then after the election happened, he was like, I really felt like I didn't need to drive that point home any more than was already happening, and I really felt like we just kind of really needed a breath of levity at the end, which is how they ended up with the other one.
I think, yeah, I mean, I totally, understand the appeal of the original ending and why he might have initially made that choice, but at the same time, I'm just so glad that, I'm T.S. motherfucking A, we handle shit, It's among the other iconic things in that movie that exists, because at that point in the movie, it's like, it's such a relief, and yet at the end still has, it's still in a lot of ways a very, mournful ending, by no means does it leave you feeling like everything's going to be perfectly okay, which I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, it still happened and life goes on, I think is really what I took from the newer ending, was this shit happened, and now they're just going to drive away, and Allison Williams lays there and dies, just bleeds out. It feels more justified than the other ending, and I think they're just trying to, I think it was a smart choice, so I guess that would be that, given the face of the administration, the choice was to, it's maybe people don't need the truth, the real ending. What they really need is just something that could make them feel a little better at the end of all of this.
Well, Mo, do you want to tell us about your first pick?
Well, we're continuing on that theme. I just, for my first pick, this is a movie that I feel very much pairs up with Get Out. And that movie, surprisingly, absolutely no one. That movie is Moonlight, which I have been unable to stop talking about since it came out.
Which movie?
Moonlight.
Oh, yes, Moonlight.
Yeah. Because they both, I feel like, come from a similar position of smaller, intimate stories about contemporary black folks. It feels a lot like if you're telling a story about black people and you wanted to get attention, it has to be either about the civil rights movement or slavery, and there's no in between. And Moonlight was different not only because it was contemporary, but because it was about intersectionality. It was about also being gay and also being poor and also living with someone who is an addict, and all these very specific factors. And that specificity touched a lot of people. It was relatable, it was understandable, and it won its share of awards for it, and I am overjoyed about that. And the fact that statement that it makes, that you can tell stories like this about marginalized groups from the voices of those marginalized groups, I think that changed things in Hollywood, and that hopefully we will get different stories coming out from different artists. That's not just the same crop of people, but that we can get more unique, more offbeat stories like this. And that was my understanding of Essential, that these are the movies that kind of changed the landscape of Hollywood. And so when I heard that, I knew that this movie had to be on the list.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing. True.
No, I mean, in terms of changing the landscape of Hollywood, one thing that I think is really, really kind of magnificent of in terms of what Moonlight achieved was, I mean, it was a really big financial success, and it was a, you know, what I think a movie that, you know, people thought was initially going to be like kind of a, you know, mostly a critic's darling, became really like a downright like mainstream success. Like I remember, you know, those months after it came out, and, you know, I mean, that was the movie that it came up in every conversation. I mean, really every almost like you could not have like a conversation about, you know, what was great in cinema in 2016 and not have Moonlight come up. And you know what, and you've talked about this in the past, like Mo, like kind of the art of, you know, the more specific something is, the more universal it is. I mean, like it's kind of a it almost like, you know, in an interesting way, there's a mythic quality to the film as well, isn't there? I mean, it's a true epic coming of age story, like telling the story of this amazing transformation, right?
Yeah. I actually, I'm glad Mo picked Moonlight, because it did make picking Get Out easy and more obvious. I actually didn't pick this, but what was in my contention for my list was actually Black Panther, and what I think successfully both Black Panther, Moonlight, and Get Out did was prove that, you know, that this myth of, oh, you know, if there's a lead black character, people are going to think it's a movie for black people, and that white people won't want to go see it, and it was just a theory that held strong even to, you know, the late 90s. I recently watched Spawn. Someone recommended it, and I don't know why they did. but even in the movie, he has his best friend is a white guy, but in the comic books, the best friend is a black guy. And they actually made the choice to, Top and Front said that there was a studio choice to change the best friend to a white guy, because they didn't want people seeing two black characters in the trailers and think it was a movie for just black people.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, thankfully they didn't decide to change the, you know, main character to a white guy, but still, and I think that was what, when we watched Moonlight, you know, beat La La Land for Best Picture, it proved that there is not just an audience for black-led cinema or black-led stories or African-American stories. It's not just for one group of people. If the story is good and great, it doesn't matter who's in it. People will pay money to see it. People voted with their dollar. They're like, give us more. And now I think Black Panther is just the number 12 highest grossing film of all time.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
It's going to be hard to argue that, oh, well, will people see a black man if he's in the lead role? When clearly it's, you know, or a black woman. It is, I mean, Us was still pretty good financial success, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I think that is really the lesson I took mostly from the decade, was that, you know, white people are not the only people that we actually want to pay money to see. And thankfully people came out to, you know, tell Hollywood that with their dollars.
I think too. I mean, I mean, for one thing, you know, Black Panther, like, you know, there was the you know, racist argument that it could not, you know, do well overseas, and it was, as we now know, it did very well overseas. And then also just, you know, one more thing about Moonlight, we should really talk about, you know, in terms of essential. I mean, there's, like, you know, so many of the most essential performances of the decade are in that movie, and of course, you know, all the actors who play Chiron, you know, Alex Hibbert, Ashton Sanders, and Trevante Rhodes. I mean, that's a really amazing achievement. That those actors were so in sync with each other, and, you know, kind of like really, you know, that you really believed it was the same character. But the supporting cast is, you know, well, and, you know, from Mahershala Ali and Naomi Harris, and, you know, on. I mean, it's really an amazing showcase for all of them too.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, you guys ready to hear my first pick?
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Well, I was I had some weird preamble I was going to do, but I'll just say it's The Social Network. So basically, I was kind of late to the party on The Social Network. I didn't see it when it was in theaters. I actually didn't see it until I watched it on the TV in my dorm lounge at U of O, or the lounge in the dorm building. And I really enjoyed it at the time, enjoyed it many times after, but it took me a while to realize just how important that movie is. And, we're going to be talking about a lot of films, for the course of this podcast, some of which were, mattered because of, what they did for, film as an art form or film as an industry. The Social Network, I think, is a example of a different kind of essential, because it's a movie that really has encapsulated something important about the world. And before I get into what that is, I think it's important to note that, love the movie or hate it, I happen to love it. I think it's important to remember that it is it takes a lot of poetic license. The narrative thrust of the movie is that Mark Zuckerberg creates Facebook, as a response to, being dumped by a girl. And the movie, doesn't take into account, the fact that, for during the span of time it depicts, he was with his now wife, Priscilla Chan, and in fact, she's not even mentioned in the film, let alone played by an actor. And so, there's, definitely, as it's not a movie that should be taken as like a note by note, retelling of, how the creation of Facebook really happened. But I think nonetheless, it got to something profound about, what Facebook means and how it affects our lives. And, the image of, Zuckerberg at the end of the film, kind of refreshing his screen over and over again, waiting for a friend request to be answered, really, speaks to the broader concerns of social media and, just the, how, it's been attributed, although this is spewed by some, in terms of increasing isolation, anxiety, depression, which, I may or may not have some personal experience with it having that effect on me. But,
we're all having some experience with that right now.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, now more than ever. And using sort of the story of Facebook's creation as a kind of window into that, that larger thing, I think was something really profound the movie achieved. And also, I have to say, perhaps unfairly, like, I find the movie, so compelling that I always, kind of assumed that, it's, the basic idea that the movie put forth that, Mark Zuckerberg is a greedy, untrustworthy, egocentric person. I always kind of bought into that, and it turns out that depiction was, perhaps even smarter than, Aaron Sorkin or David Fincher or Jesse Eisenberg ever realized. Because, given what we've learned about Facebook, in the years since that movie came out, and, the, like all the harm it has caused throughout the world in terms of, helping Trump's election to, literally leading to people's deaths, in Myanmar, for instance, we know what kind of company it is and what kind of person Zuckerberg is more now than ever, and that's why I really do hope that there's a sequel someday, because there's so much more dirt to dig up. And I also think that someone playing Sheryl Sandberg in a sequel, I think that would be just such a fascinating performance to watch, and a kind of fascinating dual narrative with Zuckerberg and Sandberg and the kind of joint corruption there. So I mean, that's why I think in addition to being a great film, and an incredibly entertaining and fascinating film, I think The Social Network, it's a movie anyone should watch if they wanna understand, like some of the most important transformations of the past decade and beyond, really, and that's why I picked it.
compiling my list, I went and looked at everybody else's best of the decade, and Social Network was consistently on all of them. And I was like, I don't know if I would consider this essential, but I mean, I guess given what Facebook is and how it's utilized, like, I think even then, like, when the movie came out, we were like, wow, a movie about the guy that made Facebook and how he made Facebook? We're like, well, that seems like good storytelling. Well, maybe not good storytelling up front, but I mean, I think we all realize, like, the amount of effect and influence Facebook had on our lives at that time. Like, imagine it, now. Like, they have carved out a little corner. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, and even, like, in this state of the world that we're in right now, there's a lot of people who are really relying on Facebook to get a hold of people they love, and, dress it up as that as much as you want. It's still a business at the end of the day, and it did help get Trump elected. It does not seem to care about the spread of misinformation on its website as much as it really should. It's but I would, so I was like, when I saw it on your list, I was like, wow, was that movie as good as I remember? I'm like, is it essential? But I think I would argue, it's the most. It does kind of give at least an eye into something that has, shaped all of our lives, especially in this last decade, in a weird little look into maybe a dramatization on how it came to be.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting. You mentioned, looking at different lists. I mean, I have a list actually that I published on T.H.O. THOmoviereviews.wordpress.com of my favorite films of the past decade, and The Social Network actually is not on that list. As much as I love it, it's not among my favorites of the decade. But I do think it's an important film, and it is, even though it's not on my list of personal favorites, it's also a great film. It's a film I rewatched quite a bit, and that's kind of one reason I was excited about doing this. Like, I kind of wanted to talk about movies like outside of my like usual group of favorites, because I'll talk about those every chance I can get.
Yeah.
Well, Max, do you want to talk about your second pick?
Ooh, I know. I'm trying to figure out which movie I should talk about next. Let's talk about Parasite real quick. one more time at the beginning of the year. It's my most recent.
I think you mean 4-time Oscar winner, Parasite.
Like 4-time. Oh my gosh.
You're here.
That's what we should address for that.
We haven't. What all of us? I don't think we've talked since that happened, right?
That was astonishing.
I know.
Oh, I guess so. Yeah, you're right. We haven't. I feel like all I've done is talk about it to everyone who will listen.
And first of all, like I want to hear from you guys. Like I didn't predict it would win Best Picture, but I thought that was a possibility, but I never in a million years, predicted it would take Best Picture and Best Director. I mean, did either of you guys have any inkling of, of that happening that way?
I thought it was a possibility. I definitely felt like there was some stiff competition, and I worried that it was just kind of get, for lack of a better term, ghettoized or kind of shunted off just because it is, the foreign language entry.
Sure.
And then it's full of to it in a big bad way, and I was amazed and overjoyed by it. Like that we have, a Best Picture winner that was the legit Best Picture of the contenders. That was something else. That was a really weird night.
And also, I mean, going back to Moonlight, this is I would argue certainly the best, the worthiest Best Picture win since then. I mean, by a long shot.
Absolutely. I remember. I think I said it in our last podcast. I know I told you guys, like when I left that theater, I told everyone, I think it's the best movie I'm going to see all year. I don't think I'm going to see anything better than that. And it's probably not going to win that. It's probably not going to get nominated for Best Picture. I'm like, it might get Best Foreign Language film. This is what I told guys. That was the day of. Before it was the international language, or international film. And honestly, I just, like, steeled up my heart for that, because it does happen, but it's just kind of what I expect from the Academy Awards. It never really, like, rewards the thing I think actually is the best. I've been hurt ever since Mad Max Fury Road, and I was just like they can't get it right. And so I was like, oh, okay, cool, it's nominated. But I think even up until the night when I finally filled out my sheet, I had to be real, and if I was going to win the competition of most correct answers, I actually put my money on Parasite for Best Picture because I really wanted it, but I assumed, I was like, well, if they give it to Best Picture, Best International Feature, what are the chances they're going to give it to the given director as well? Not that I didn't think he deserved it, but I also, like, I was prepared for Sam Mendes to win for 1917. I didn't want it, but I was, like, prepared for it, and I was totally, like, aware that he did a great job as well. Also a really near impossible task, but yeah, when it won all four, I couldn't believe it, and one of the main reasons I believe it's on this list is because it won Best Picture, and until that night, I did not realize an international or non-English speaking film had never won Best Picture.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that was the moment. I mean, you know, had you asked me beforehand, I would have said, oh yeah, I'm sure someone else has. Like I wouldn't have been able to tell you who, but I just would have assumed at some point, because so many films have been nominated for Best Picture that are non-English speaking films. But I guess, yeah, once I really thought about it, I was like, oh, I guess not. And so for it to be South Korea, I mean, that's a huge deal. And, you know, it talks about class struggle, which I think is talk about a movie that, you know, speaks one truth that is a universal truth. You know, it is very much a South Korean tale, but within it, the world saw itself and the way the world somehow works. And it's just, it's a little disheartening at times. It's scary. But there is a truth in it, and it's so amazing. It was so amazing when they announced Parasite. I cheered. I was in my own living room, like it was not a movie for me, by me, but I felt like it was a victory being at win, because I felt like it did deserve it, and it's rare we get an Oscar night where I think you get to the end of the night and you're like, that was it. They got it spot on.
I was wondering too. Like, I mean, I wonder if either of you guys could talk about like I mean, we know that, you know, the Academy has, you know, made an effort to you know, expand its, you know, body, you know, of members, you know, beyond, you know, white men, although that is the, you know, still the dominant group, you know, among the voters. You know, most of them are still white men, but obviously the, you know, like definitely the Academy has, you know, changed and evolved, however slowly. And I wonder, like, you know, like the fact that, you know, this is such a significant win, you know, it being the first, you know, movie not in English to win Best Picture. I wonder if you guys think that says something about Parasite and about the film, like, being, you know, able to you know, reach, you know, such a broad audience because of something special about it, or does it say, like, you know, something more about, you know, the Academy itself changing, like, you know, if this group of voters was, you know, voting back in 2001, could Crouching Tiger or Hidden Dragon have, you know, beat Gladiator and won Best Picture? I mean, I know this is all gets us into hypotheticals and whatnot, but I don't know. I'm just curious, because I think it's interesting how all those factors collide.
No, you know, or should I?
I was just going to say, I don't have an answer for that. I have no idea. I'm personally unfamiliar with the inner workings of the Academy. That's not something I pay a whole lot of attention to of who's the member and how the voting works and stuff like that. So I couldn't tell you.
Well, I feel like it is a moment. I think that's what makes this movie so essential. Just along the same lines as Moonlight, I think there's a lot of culminating factors that led to Parasite winning, but I think a large part of it is frustration and injustice a little bit. I mean, this year we also talked about how there were no female directors, even though there was a great crop of women directors that you would argue should have had a spot in there. Greta Gerwig being one of them.
Yeah.
Lulu Wang from The Farewell as well could be argued. Like, there was an argument for it. And
well, and also, like, I think it's important to note that, some, I mean, just because, the industry systematically, discriminates against women directors, there were years where, there weren't necessarily many options in terms of, great films directed by women that you could nominate. And this was not one of those years. There were a lot of options, and they, chose to ignore those.
Exactly. I think there is always that thing, they're like, well, why wasn't this or such and such person nominated? And you're like, well, when you put it up against all the others, you could argue one thing over the other. Racism is probably a factor, but not directly. But this was not one of those years. You're right. There was a lot of great potential out there. And I actually think this was kind of an embarrassment of riches type of year. There was a lot of movies that were quote-unquote stuck from this year. Like there was movies people couldn't believe didn't get a nomination. Uncut Gems, The Farewell, Honey Boy, you shake a stick, you'll hit
my name.
Yes. I mean, you throw a stick, you'll hit something worthy of being nominated this year, and I think that was pretty cool. But I think Parasite brings up a lot of, again, the haves and the have-nots. So even though everybody in the film is Korean, the only difference is one set is poor, the other one is rich. I do think that did play a factor into the voting. I think just like La La Land, even though being a fine film, it being very white, I think also did lend some votes to Moonlight taking Best Picture that night. It did, enough people get tired of it, and, they would say, like, oh, what does voting change? Like, you know what, this is the classic case of going, you know what, it might not be what everybody else is voting for, but I believe in this film, and I like this film, and I think it deserves this film, or deserves this award, and people vote. And thankfully, I think you could say that there's a barometer within the system that, at the very least, there's enough people voting with what they think is good, and it panning out to be, winners like Parasite. Especially with the backlash. You could also attribute the backlash of Green Book winning. Like, people were mad, and I think in that moment,
I'm still mad.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm mad.
Everyone's mad about Green Book. Although, it did go to really great John Mulaney pretending to be Biden moment a few weeks ago on SNL. So, but I do think that is a factor, is enough people going, you know what, who deserves this? The little guy, the person from out of town, the woman, the black man, whoever. And that is really, to see this movie cap off our year and where we kind of are now in our history between, it does feel like the divide between, the haves and the have-nots is so wide. And I think everybody feels that. And I think it is, even though it's a movie about, South Korea, it does feel like a movie about us now. And in a way that Get Out did, in a way that Moonlight did, I think it is a moment, and I think it will be the one that says that at the very least it will be always forever be known as the third, international feature to win, foreign language film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. I mean, it's already changed history in that regard. But I think what it talks about, how that opens us up to the world is important, and I think is essential. It is the fact that I think a lot of people had kind of counted it out. Myself included. I was still, to the very night of, I was like, it could win all these awards, but it also could not, because that's just how history works.
Well, before we move on, I just want to say, you know, at Cinema 21, where I work, you know, we played Parasite for months on end. I think something like, you know, 4 months, and you know, its run did not end until about a week ago when the theater closed because of the coronavirus. So I think it's a testament to Parasite that you know, it was so successful critically and commercially that it took a pandemic to end its run. So, you know.
This is the thing. The only thing we could stop Parasite was a pandemic. And also, to talk about how things shape, I forgot to bring up with Get Out was another reason I think it's essential is how it did affect the Academy Awards that year.
Yeah.
Not that the Academy Awards is any barometer of, like, you know, movie history, really, but, I mean, in that movie was, well, you know, we think your movie's good, but we really want to make sure it has the best chance at opening. We're going to put it out in March.
Sure.
You know, nobody is thinking we should release our movie in March, you know, for Oscar chances. Like, the boldest movie you could do in releasing a movie for Oscar bait would be, like, releasing it in September, you know?
Right.
So you don't crowd December. And Get Out was, you know, maybe didn't take home Best Picture that night, but it managed to stay in theaters from March to October.
Right.
And it stayed in the conversation. And there's a reason it stayed in the conversation. And I do think that in that way, it bucked a lot of things. It was like, no, you don't have to be released in fall to be considered a Best Picture contender.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and the one that they even tried to duplicate by releasing Us in March, which was a bad move on their part. But you know what? They tried again, and I do think that was another thing. I think this year was about proving, you know, the things that were, you know, the things you could count on or consider, you know, like a safe bet, like releasing your Oscar movie in November, isn't necessarily a safe bet. It doesn't mean anything.
Sure. Well, Mo, let's hear your next pick.
So this is also going to be another obvious one for me. It's 2010 was absolutely the year when the biggest genre on the planet was superhero movies, and front of the pack was undoubtedly the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and their sort of planting their flag was the Avengers in 2012, and that was the movie. That was the one that kind of changed the game in such a big bad way, because it wasn't just like hugely successful, which, you know, it was, but it's also this idea, the core story of the Avengers is ultimately a celebration of the Avengers themselves, of, hey, let's take these disparate ideas, let's take these characters from an action comedy and a fantasy and a war movie and a horror movie, and just put them all together, and that shouldn't work. And that's the meat of the story. That's what Joss Whedon said, was that the point of the Avengers is that they don't work together, but they do anyway. Like, they shouldn't, but they do, and that's what makes it so engaging. And since then, we've seen other people try, and some very often fail to do a cinematic universe in the same idea. I think we all remember the planned Dark Universe, and how that went pear-shaped pretty quickly.
Which spawned the great all-time movie quote, "Thank you for bringing me back to life and everything, Nick, but what are we even doing here?" But
it's also, you know, the idea of how we can make a movie where all the characters are action figures, and we can still have fun with it, and we can still connect with it. And it's not, you know, through the Avengers, you get the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but also the kind of offbeat stuff. We get Guardians of the Galaxy, but being like, okay, we can take these weird kind of high concept characters and mash them up. Let's go even farther with that idea. We get all this stuff from the massive success of this one movie, and it's whether or not you think it's even the best Avengers movie at this point. You can't deny just how much it changed the landscape of the 2010s. And so I figured if
Well, let me ask you this, Mo. You alluded to, the fact that other studios have tried to, mimic the cinematic universe model where you have like kind of, maybe like a couple event films and then you have all these other spin-offs, like kind of essentially telling side stories or you're, focusing on, one of the characters from the big event films. And, like no one has really been able to replicate, the success Marvel has had. I mean, you mentioned the Dark Universe, the DC extended universe is also something that's not been successful. I mean, the recent DC films that have worked really well, like Wonder Woman, for instance. I mean, those are arguably the ones that are, the least connected to the other films. And then, even with Star Wars, like they were kind of trying the same model, and it seemed to initially be working because, Rogue One was such a hit, and then you have Solo, kind of torpedoing that whole arm where now, like Disney and Lucasfilm of all people are saying they're, going to make fewer Star Wars films, when they wanted to make one a year, And I wonder if you could talk about like what is it about like how Marvel did things that they succeeded with that model where so many others failed?
It's tough to nail down, but I think for me it feels like such a high wire act, because you have a producer, you have Kevin Feige, who's kind of looking over the whole thing, kind of keeping all the ducks in a row, crossing the T's, on the I's, all that stuff. But the individual films, you turn them over to these creators, these directors with these very distinct voices. You have Jon Favreau and Joe Johnston and the Russo brothers and James Gunn and Ryan Coogler, all these people who have their own way of doing things, who have their own voices and things to say, and you kind of just let them do their thing. And then when you do the big crossover, it's less about trying to specifically create continuity and sort of force these little moments that like people see that and they'll think, oh, I remember that from the other movie. It's not about that. It's just like this is a extremely reductive answer, but they focus on telling good stories above all else. And I think that's how they're able to create this sense of cohesion despite these disparate elements. And it's not them, running from the ending first. We knew we were going to get to the Avengers eventually, but how we get there, we're still figuring it out. They were taking steps. They weren't doing it all at once. Like that seems to be kind of the downfall of a lot of them. Of a lot of these other things is the DCEU or the Dark Universe trying to run before they can walk.
Sure.
And with Avengers, it was just okay. We're just going to focus on making each character their own thing. They don't need to exist just to be part of the Avengers later on. They need to be able to tell their own story. And I still think they stumbled along the way. I think the Thor movies don't hold up as well. I have affection for them, but it wasn't until they got super weird that they got really fun.
I mean, I love Thor 1. I think Thor 1 is still pretty... It's more solid than I think anybody remembers.
I like that movie, yeah.
Yeah, but Thor 2... Thor 2 has problems.
But, by the way, did you guys notice that that Thor the Dark World was trending on Twitter the other day?
No.
It's like...
I think, there was some conversation of, what is the worst MCU movie, and that's probably it. But also, the one it was up against was Iron Man 3, and Iron Man 3 rips, so I don't know how people are talking about.
Also,
Iron Man 2 is worse than Iron Man 3. It shouldn't even be a part of the discussion. And I think Thor 2 is actually far worse than Iron Man 2.
Yeah, I mean, I just find it funny, I think like, I didn't love Iron Man 3, but I actually think it's a pretty interesting, kind of unusual, thoughtful take on the character. And I don't know, if I were to nominate an Iron Man movie for the scrap heap, it would definitely have to be the second one.
Yeah. I also, to circle back to Ben's question, I think Mo kind of hit the nail on the head, which was that they went into this going, we want to make an Avengers film. And I think then being the first one to create a universe, I think that it did work to their advantage. But I think it was, they're like, well, we want to make a Thor movie and a Captain America movie and an Iron Man and a Hulk movie before we even attempt an Avengers movie. I think they realized that, to get, after you get one movie, you need that one movie to do really well so someone will give you money to make the next movie.
Yeah.
So they're like, all right, let's make sure Iron Man is really good and solid. So like, oh wow, they're so good and solid, people want a sequel. Oh man, that money helped us fund this Hulk movie to be a little better. Oh, now that all of these are done well, we can afford these other movies. It's like, okay, yeah, they don't run before you can walk. And I think everybody said it couldn't be done. So I think Feige is the secret sauce of the ingredients. Because you can't just have a producer who has made a good movie come on and do what he did. He is always thinking a few steps ahead, but also learning to let go of the steering wheel. He's like, this story needs to be good, but the only way it's going to be good is if I let you do your thing. Here's the ingredients to work with. Is that a sneeze?
Oh, no.
Oh, I thought it was a sneeze.
What I did want to say, it's funny we keep saying we keep talking about don't run before you can walk. It made me think back to the first Iron Man when Tony Stark says to Jarvis, sometimes you have to run before you can walk.
Which is a great movie line, but not great advice when making a line of movies.
Well, and Mo, you alluded to this. I mean, to kind of in terms of like what Marvel did that these other companies didn't. I mean, I think patience, plays into it so much. The fact that like by the time the Avengers arrives, we had, we cared about Tony Stark and Steve Rogers and Thor, and had a relationship with those characters. So them coming together means something. And then you look at the DCEU and them doing Justice League so early in the game, and like at that point it's like why should we be excited about the team up of a Flash and an Aquaman who we really know from those shitty low-res videos in Batman versus Superman. It's starting to hail, by the way, so that's if people listening are wondering what that sound is, that's what it is, but we will continue.
I keep coming back to how Movie Bob he talked about Batman v Superman as it was Batman nobody knew fighting a Superman nobody liked for the fate of a DC universe nobody had bothered to pick up yet. Yeah, and
that sums it up.
The other thing that strikes me about Marvel, about how much they win, or how successful they've been, is flexibility, is their willingness to kind of change things and upend things and kind of test the waters, see what works, go with the flow. And I think something that's emblematic of them is sort of how SHIELD transitioned through the story, because it was a thing in the background in phase 1. Phase 2, it's kind of this central thing until they decide it's not that interesting, we're just going to blow it up. And they did, and it's made for not only an interesting story, but a more interesting future going forward. And you can change the TV show in a huge way. Yeah, and you can see it also in the development of Phil Coulson, that he starts off as just kind of this big player, and then this affection builds for him, and it's both like behind the screen and in the audience, that people really start bonding with these characters to the point that he's kind of central to the whole thing.
Well,
Agreed.
you guys ready to hear about my final pick for today?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Well, I am I feel a bit unsporting because I'm co-opting Max's favorite film of 2013, but I said I'd do it, so I will do it. I'm talking about Gravity, and the reason was that a gasp?
No, I was laughing because when I was like, Ben took Gravity, and I was like, I would have picked that one, and he's like, would you call Gravity an essential film? I was like, no, but when you're asked to describe why a movie's essential, having a deep love for it really helps.
I agree, and I do have
a deep love for Gravity.
I would say I have a deep love for it, and I think it's essential. I mean, in terms of its essentialness, if that's even a word. I mean, what I wanted to get into really is that, I think, definitely, like, this has been a really interesting decade in terms of the development of special effects, but I think this was one of the few films of the past 10 years that can be considered truly revolutionary in that regard. I mean, we all know, we all like big movies here. We know that the effect of CGI has changed movies, in really profound ways, and to the point where, even directors who kind of profess a distaste for it, still use it in really important ways. You'd be hard pressed to find a kind of a more of a CGI agnostic than Christopher Nolan, and yet the CGI on half of Aaron Eckhart's face in the Dark Knight was one of the most impressive effects of that time. And then you come to Gravity, and it's a real revolution in terms of doing animation that can pass for live action. And I don't want to undermine what James Cameron achieved with Avatar, because that movie was important as well in terms of showing that motion capture could do more than just maybe create a convincing single character, but that movie was creating a world that was unfamiliar and to a certain extent that could look like anything, whereas Gravity was using CGI to create the world of being in orbit around Earth, and that's much harder because we've seen photos. We know what that looks like. We have a sense of that, and so it was a much harder task to essentially make an animated film where except for a few times, the only thing that would be real would be Sandra Bullock and George Clooney's performances, and it holds up so beautifully. I mean, I always feel like the test of how good a special effect is not how great it looks on a giant screen when you're kind of overwhelmed by surround sound in 3D, but how it looks when you're watching it at home years later when the art form has evolved. And I'm happy to say I've watched Gravity a fair number of times since it came out back in 2013, and it holds up so well. Like I literally, when I watch it, it's still kind of unbelievable to me, the fact that it is, in a certain sense, an animated film. And I really think that, like that's what makes it kind of the defining moment in terms of special effects. And the fact that, like, other directors have kind of resisted its achievements, I think only speaks to like how ahead of its time it is. I mean, you have so many films like like Interstellar or First Man or Ad Astra kind of going against the Gravity approach and trying to do things in a more old school gritty way, in terms of shooting on film and using more models, as opposed to CGI, and I love that approach as well. I think that approach works great, but Gravity is so much more, I think, progressive than those films in terms of pushing the art of filmmaking forward. And also I think there was this this myth that persisted for a long time that, kind of acting, without an environment to deal with could make even the best actors look absolutely awful, as we saw, countless examples of, most memorably, I would say, in the Star Wars prequels. But then you get to Gravity, and it's like, no, with the right director, an actor can give, one of the greatest performances of this era, with nothing to work with besides some, wires and lights, and, with the right circumstances, you can create transcendent art that way. So that's why, in addition to, again, being a great film, I think Gravity is, a really remarkable one in terms of what it did for the, film as an art form. And I think, any film that uses CGI, will stand on the shoulders of Gravity going forward. And also, like, as a side note, Gravity was Alfonso Cuarón's first film in 7 years, and I think, it kind of put to rest any question of, was one of the most significant filmmakers of our time gonna, fade into obscurity. This was the movie that, announced he was back. It was the movie that, kind of laid the groundwork for Roma, which in some ways was even more extraordinary. I think, like in terms of movies that really had an effect on the industry, had an effect on, the art of filmmaking, this is one that really you have to see if you want to understand, what the future of movies is. And I think it's going to be an important touchstone in terms of that going forward.
Absolutely. I feel like I follow everything everybody does. Absolutely. But that was kind of my explanation to Eddie a little bit, to an extent, which was, like, Gravity had worked really hard to just exist. Like the story was written years before the technology was available, which is why he waited so long to make it. He was waiting for technology to catch up to a point that he could make it. And what hadn't been created, he invented as well. And I think, in all in an attempt to create the most realistic feeling of space ever created. I'm like, there are some movies and shows where they show the vast expanse of space, and I was like, but Gravity, I feel, really captures the beauty, the terror, the aloneness, the quiet, it's like to everything that space is, and why you should be afraid of it. It was one of the most recent Rick and Morty lines came out. Literally everything is in space. And Gravity captures it in terrifying ways that is still nerve-wracking. Sometimes I watch it, I watch it at least, I think, once a year. It's one of my favorite movies. I own it on Blu-ray, and Eddie's like, why would you put yourself through this kind of stress? But I'm like, because it's so good from start to finish. And breaking down the individual elements involved in creating this movie is insane. We did the Warner Brothers studio walkthrough tour, and at the end they give you there's a walkthrough museum area where they have some props and some other stuff, and Central Perk, the Friends Cafe, like a replica. It's a thing, but when they talk about sound, they actually they have a segment on how sound in movie is created, and they have a whole soundboard up. They have a full-size movie screen with the Dolby Atmos. It only seats 30, 40 people, and it's a demonstration on how sound creation is used. And they have Gravity, the scene when right as the space station gets hit with stuff, with debris, and it starts spinning out of control up into the point that Sandra Bullock gets flung off into space. And they break it down the voice recording, the sounds that are used to create sounds around them and the environment, and then they break them down piece by piece, and then they show you the whole clip with all of them layered together. And this was a 1-minute scene. And the amount of stuff that goes into this 1 minute, which excluded any of the filming, the post, background creation, any of that was staggering. And it's a damn shame that it lost to, what did it lose to?
Well, one Best Director, but 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture.
always getting confused with the year that Mad Max lost to
Spotlight.
Thank you. I always think that's the year, but it's not. And, but yeah, 12 Years a Slave, the movie was going to lose to. But, yeah, I think Gravity, technologically speaking, is... I mean, yeah, you're right. I think later I saw an interview with Anne Hathaway explaining how they did this zero-G gravity in Interstellar, and she showed herself standing on one leg pretending to float in the air. Like, that's what they could have done, but instead Alfonso Cuarón did what he did with Gravity. And it's, yeah, I can see why directors are like, how about we not do that? It sounds really difficult.
I think, too, like... I mean, you know, it's like I mean, I know I've been like kind of, you know, intensely emphasizing the, you know, the movie as a technological breakthrough, and it was. I mean, you know, robotic cameras were invented, you know, literally for this movie, but or a kind of robotic camera, maybe would be more accurate to say. But at the same time, you know, I think Gravity is kind of, you know, underestimated as a great story, because, you know, it remains, I think, a really moving, beautiful film. And, you know, the arc of, you know, Sandra Bullock's character in terms of feeling like she has nothing to live for, and then, you know, at the end, you know, finding the strength to fight for her life. I mean that's really what makes it a masterpiece. You know, the exquisite, you know, effects work, you know, like, you know, combined with the exquisite character work, you know, both working in counterpoint, like neither like overwhelming each other, you know, coming together to create this thing that's even though it's made of all these different, you know, lovingly crafted parts, it feels like a perfect, pristine whole, and I think that's really kind of extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just as it came out, so I don't have the best grip on it. But yeah, it is phenomenal in terms of how it looks, what it does with visual effects, of creating this world that's both recognizable on its face, but also completely foreign. I keep wondering, every so often I'll have this idea of, like, if you were to show someone from the 1900s for whom film was a new thing, if you were to show them modern movies, what would you show them that would just completely blow their mind? I always go back to Gravity.
Yes.
It creates this kind of, this completely new but completely familiar world. And it does so while telling this deep and engaging story, and through these amazing performances. And it really is that great. I mean, it really is that essential.
I love Sandra Bullock in that too. I get sad that she lost. I know she lost to Kate Blanchett for Blue Jasmine.
Yeah.
I remember that. And
Blue Jasmine.
I think it's great. I can't speak. I just think I would just echo what everybody else said. Her performance is great. The score is phenomenal.
Yeah, Stephen Price, yeah.
I had it on CD for a while, so all my CDs got stolen too. It's terrifying, and Eddie's like, why would you want to drive in a car and listen to this music? And I was like, it's crazy.
Well, it's beautiful too. That theme, like, you know, I mean, that's just to die for, you know?
Oh, yeah. It's that scene right when she's, like, crashing into orbit, and, like, it's like her pod is on fire, as is all the things around her as she's crashing into orbit, and it's just that music that swells. It takes my breath away. It leaves me crying. And at the end of the movie, more often than not, like, when she's just lying on the ground,
yeah,
finally, after almost drowning, it's a movie never lets up until that last second, and then it just cuts to credit, and you're finally like, oh, I can breathe again. Like, you feel like you've been holding your breath in space the whole time. And
yes.
Yeah, it's and I think, it's in an area that is so close to us, relatively speaking. It's within our orbit, and it shows you these images that, like, it's exactly why you are in awe of space, but why you're also
Well, I think you might have been the one who told me this, Max. Like that last scene where she's finally on land. I mean, that was shot on film, wasn't it?
I did not say that.
I think it was. I mean, I think, and that's another thing I kind of love. You know that, one of the most like technologically impressive movies, and that like it at the end, like it's really kind of like beautiful, like old school nature photography in a sense, and that contrast with like the slick digitized look of the stuff in space. I mean, I don't know. I just think it's he's a master filmmaker on like so many different levels, and I love that he's not making one kind of film. I think even some of the greatest directors we have now really only make one kind of film, and that's fine. I mean like when a director becomes a brand, that's kind of exciting, because then it's like installments in an ongoing series. And then but Cuarón, I mean, it's cool that he has that ability to reinvent himself even within the same movie, really.
I'm glad Ben took Gravity, but he's like talking about something else, I guess, which allowed me to stretch my muscles and get out.
Well, I think that's gonna wrap up part 1 of this podcast. Unless you guys have any final thoughts you want to get out there on any of the films we mentioned.
No, go watch them. Go watch these movies.
Yeah.
You're locked inside. Go watch these movies, and maybe you can see why we might think they're essential.
Yes.
Go watch them again.
Yes.
You've seen them already.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have decreed their essentialness. So I mean, make of that what you will. All right.
Historians will look back on this podcast and they will put it down in the books.
All right. Well, if you like this podcast, please click thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I feel weird saying this since we were just talking about the social network, but don't forget to like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at T.H.O Movie Reviews, and please check out all the great reviews and content we have at thomoviereviews.wordpress.com. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson, here with Mo Shaunette and Maxwell Meyers, and from all of us here at T.H.O Movie Reviews, happy movie watching, not in a theater, but in the safety of your own home.
Stay home, stay safe.
Yes, absolutely.
Wash your damn hands. You filthy animals.